I'm calling us to order at 1 o'clock. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I am going to exercise what's within my power to do, so I'm told, as chair of policy committee, and deputize my fellow board members that are here to count as members of policy today. And the first thing we're going to do, can I get a motion to approve the minutes from August 26th?
As a new member of the policy committee, I make a motion to approve the committee meeting minutes.
And I'll second the new member's motion.
Okay, thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Perfect. And Dr. Crane, let's start with 2115.
Sure. Our first one up is simply a technical change to the legal references. The legal references include North Carolina Session Law 1975, which was revised with North Carolina Session Law 2011-138. So it is simply an addition of a legal reference.
Mr. Hershey.
Does this need to go to first reading, or does this go straight to?
This goes to, if you approve, this goes to consent for one reading, since it is a technical change, and then it gets posted.
I just want to check the date. So I believe that's going to be our meeting on October 7th. Is that right, Mr. Chair? Is that?
For the technical changes,
Can be,
that's
yeah.
right, yeah. For the ones that are the more substantive changes, it's the following meeting. So for this one, it would go to the next one, I believe.
Which is, and the following would be October 21st?
Yeah.
I just want to make, okay. All right, so is there a motion to approve this for consent on October 7th?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Okay, moving on to 4150.
Sure.
Thank you, Ms. Pulliam, for coming.
I apologize for my casual appearance. I have an information session later today.
Okay.
We're just bringing for you an amendment to 4150 that corresponds to an amendment you've already approved to 4100 to align with updates to the military compact. So if you'll recall, in 4100, you made some approvals to allow for something called an anticipated domicile to be used to help establish domiciliary rights to enroll in Wake County. So 4150 would look at Section C, Part 1. I think I got all my things right, yeah. Where it says students admitted based on domicile. So this is partially a technical correction. I think we had an article missing in one of our sentences. And then the addition of the specialized instructions for those families that might qualify under that anticipated domicile provision. So it would now read, students admitted to the Wake County Public Schools based on domicile pursuant to Board Policy 4100 shall be assigned to, that's the insertion of a word that was missing in the sentence, the school of the appropriate grade span within the attendance area of the student's domicile. New section, or new language, I should say, to beef up this section. Students admitted to the Wake County Public School System based on the anticipated domicile of parents or guardians on active military duty and otherwise subject to Section E of Policy 4100 shall be assigned to the school of the appropriate grade span within the attendance area of the anticipated domicile. Additional new language. If the military family does not have a specific anticipated domicile at the time of enrollment, the student will be assigned to the school of the appropriate grade span within the attendance area of the temporary residence until a domicile is established. And those are the only provisions, other than maybe a session law reference at the end.
All right, board members, are there any questions? Okay, hearing none, is there a motion to put 4150 on consent for the October 21st meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Thank you. All right, we're going to look at 7820 personnel files next.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
How are y'all today?
Good.
Okay, so this is just a revision for personnel files, and it reflects new state law changes. And so if you just look at section F, which is on page 6, you will see that we added language to reflect the updated statutory definition for an employee's total compensation. Then if you look at section G, that's a whole new section. And that is brought over from the School Board Association's language, where they include all of this information in section G. So it's in red because these are School Board Association suggested changes. So we didn't have any additional suggested changes or updates.
No, it's essentially verbatim from the statute that requires this information to be posted on your website, and that information is already posted on your website.
Great.
All right, board members, do you have any questions about 7820?
I mean, I think, Mr. Ramey, if it's all required by statute, is that, so it's not.
You don't necessarily have to have a policy that says so, but there's no wiggle room in terms of the information that you post. That's statutory, yes.
Thank you.
Great, appreciate that clarification. Okay, can I get a motion for 7820 to go on consent on October 21st? Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. 7405, teacher responsibilities and duties.
Okay, this is also a revision, and we brought this policy back because there was a question last time when we brought 7602, extra duty program, then it lent itself to a question about this policy. So we added some clarifying language to help address why the two policies. 7405 would be all teacher responsibilities and duties and how they're defined. And then 7602 would just be the board approved for pay extra duties. And they have their own set of rules that would be under 7602. So we made reference to that in 7405, and you can see that in blue to help differentiate between the two policies and to let people understand that, you know, if it's a for pay extra duty, it's covered additionally under 7602. So that's the language that we added to try to clarify that from the last committee meeting.
I was just looking at the blue under just a phrase, but are not limited to, under section A, number 2.
Yes, we added the but are
Yeah,
not
yeah.
limited to, so that it's not all encompassing.
Yeah.
There
Mr.
could
Hershey.
be other duties that are assigned.
Sure. Mr. Hershey?
Is there a reason that we say for a given school year or sports season?
Yes, that's in 7602.
That was the one, yeah.
In order to ensure that it doesn't just continue on with that additional pay where it's like a right or an entitlement.
Okay, I
We want to
got you.
make sure that that school is looking at these annually and determining if that person needs to stay in that role because they're receiving this additional pay.
Okay. I didn't know if there was a reason to add or sports season if they're looking at it annually for a given school year, but it's fine.
Just for further
Yeah, that's good.
clarification, I think is the only reason.
I got you, it's good.
Yeah, I think we have some coaches who just coach one season a year, and we have some
Right.
coaches, like a track coach example, who would coach multiple seasons.
Chair Haggerty, did you want to make some remarks?
So,
You tried, Chair Haggerty.
I did. So this is policy 7405, and I know this is not the change that you're bringing today, but we had looked at 7405 about a year ago, and then it came up again more recently. One of the things that I know that we did in the latest revision, not this one, was it was part of our policy migration where we were looking to update the policy based on the School Board Association's recommendations. One of those recommendations tracked the change in state statute in terms of teacher eligibility for extracurricular after-hours pay and what those duties were. And when we got the policy, it was pretty much, well, here's the recommendation. The board talked about the extra duty requirements for new teachers, and there was some discussion around that. But what we didn't talk about was that our change in policy removed an exemption that we had in place for teachers or staff with more than 27 years of service who had an exemption from any required extra duty pay, or, if extra duty work, or if they were unable to do it, that it wouldn't reflect on their employee evaluations, they couldn't be docked or dinged for it. And we never really talked about that when we made the change. And then doing some digging and research, we found out that the original exemption was created by a state statute, but that statute had changed almost like a decade ago, and but our policy continued to grant that exception. So when we changed the policy, we really just were tracking what was legally required by the state. But the impact is that we did take away something that was sort of a perk or a benefit for some of our most senior teachers. And so it's not necessarily, well, it's not part of today's proposed changes, but since we're talking about 7405, I'd talked to Chair Edmonds about, could we get a little bit of discussion about this? If the only reason for removing the exemption was just to track the statute and there wasn't necessarily a request for it. This wasn't something principals or area superintendents or staff had come to us and said, we're really low on labor, we're low on personnel for these duties, so we need to make these senior teachers do this. But rather, it was just sort of a technicality. Is it something we'd consider restoring? And so I just wanted to...
And my input, just generally as a board member, is, I equate it to what we did for master's pay, which is a much larger, in my mind, benefit, for probably touches more people of, recruiting and retention. And I don't know why. Another thing with our more senior level teachers with that level of experience, that 25 plus years, over the last decade where the state has raised teacher pay, they've largely focused on beginning teachers. Those are the cohort that have gotten the biggest bump. And so I think anything we can do to support our most senior teachers in Wake County Public Schools, if this is something that we can do, we should do it.
If we go back, it was, I think, September of 2024 when this first came up. And so if you go in Assembly to the Policy Committee meeting there, you can see what the old policy used to look like. So I'll be honest, I didn't come prepared with a specific amendment, but rather I just wanted to bring it up for discussion. And then if there is interest in restoring it, maybe we could work on some language that we could bring to the next meeting.
Definitely, and we could add it to B1, capital B1, A through B, and just add it there with the beginning teachers. So it's under those same parameters, basically, where you could have the waiver and, the different things that a principal has also with the beginning teacher. So there's flexibility if there's a high need at the school or, something of that nature, they could certainly do it. And we would have to define veteran teacher. You could say like 27 years or more experience could define a veteran teacher. And then you would just add veteran teacher there where you have the beginning teacher throughout. It wouldn't be a difficult change if you did want to add that language.
Mr. Hershey?
I would probably not try to define veteran teacher if we're doing a specific carve-out after a certain amount of time. Because if you start saying veteran teacher as 27 years, I just think that's an unnecessary definition to make.
So rather than saying veteran teacher and defining veteran teacher, what, are you okay if you just said any teacher of 27 years or service? Okay.
Yeah, I would just say,
Sure.
that way we're not,
You're not creating an expectation that
if someone's been teaching for
26
20
years,
years,
they're
what, I'm not a veteran
veteran.
teacher?
Yeah.
You know, kind of thing.
Right, but I thought we were referencing a 25 or 27 because of the change in state law when it was taken away.
Yeah,
That law was
Is that-
rescinded, so you would be conferring a local benefit at this point. You could decide how to, where you want the cutoff to be. It could be 27 years, 25 years, 30 years.
Okay, okay.
But I think and tell me if I'm wrong, I think your concern was more about the semantics of it.
Correct.
Right.
Not the actual number of
Correct.
years.
Yeah.
We would include the number of years, just not.
Not say veteran
label
teacher
it.
along with it.
Correct,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, great. So why don't we do this? Why don't we, to give staff the leeway to work on some language, why don't we, if I could ask for a motion to put 7405 on the action agenda. Do you want to do that October 7th or October 21st?
One additional question.
Sure, go ahead.
In the policy, it says the superintendent shall be responsible for preparation of a standard extra duty salary schedule.
Where are you?
We're still on 7602.
Yeah.
On the bottom. I mean, it's just I don't know what it's the third paragraph.
Oh, okay.
Is that is that required annually? Is that something that just comes a part of the salary structures that we get on an annual basis kind of thing for teacher pay?
Yeah, so this year's a little different due to, we didn't do our normal updating all salary schedules, but generally when we bring to you, like budget passes, we bring to you all the salary schedules,
Right.
extra duties included in that.
Okay, that's when it is. Okay, cool, thanks.
So, Madam Chair, if I
Yeah.
might, I would like to move that we bring this to the action agenda and then also direct staff to incorporate amendments reflecting the discussion that we've had for consideration by the full board.
Okay, and October 7th or 21st?
Is that enough time, October 7th, or do you need until the 21st?
When do we have to turn it in? If it's October 7th.
Next week.
Next week is fine. Yep.
Okay.
As long as we have a day or two, we can make that work.
Okay.
Sticking with the
That's it.
27 years that that has been in policy, is my understanding. Yep.
7 years.
I mean, that's the expectation. I know a lot of teachers are aware of that.
Yep.
Second.
Yep. This would be a continuation of your current approach.
Great, thank you.
All right, so that was a motion by Chair Haggerty and a second by Mr. Hershey. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And 4705?
Okay, so 4705, 7825 RMP replaces 3 RMPs from the old name. So basically, policy 4705, it was adopted like April 10th, 2018, but the RMPs were not migrated over at that time. So we just want to go ahead and migrate those now, and the School Board Association combined them into one instead of having 3 separate. We had one, under administrative services, one under instructional personnel, and one under support personnel. So this just replaces all 3 of those in one RMP, and really just minor changes from the School Board Association with, adding personal identifying information, adding general statute, just a few minor language revisions there.
But we do need, this is 4705 as policy that we're revising.
The policy was already adopted, and we're not revising that.
Okay.
We're just migrating the RMPs.
Right, so you don't need us
Just
to
don't
take
need board
any
action.
action. All right. Okay.
Information.
Yeah,
Yep,
we got it.
information,
Okay.
and we can post the revised RMP tomorrow.
Great, thank you. Okay, 7720, employee political campaign activities. My understanding is that this was something that the board wanted to look at in 2024, but election season was already underway, and so we were trying to get away from that and take some action ahead of the 2026 election cycle. So that's why it's coming before us today. And it is, I'm going to ask Mr. Ramey to speak to this, but it is really about campaign activity specifically, and not political speech or, other things. So, Mr.
Right.
Ramey, would you like to?
Sure,
make
I'll
some
give
remarks?
a brief sort of overview. First of all, this is an NCSBA model policy that's been edited somewhat by staff. You see the blue and green edits were edits that were made the last time the policy was presented. The red are additional edits I've made based on some board questions to really underscore the limited scope of the policy. As you said, it's not intended to be regulation of all speech or political speech in the workplace. That gets us into some complex First Amendment rules. Rather, the main intent of the policy is to implement a state statutory requirement that prohibits expenditure of public funds in support or opposition to a referendum, election, or particular candidate for elective office. And since you're not allowed to use public funds, the School of Government and other experts have said that could very well apply to public resources, could even apply to employee staff time. So if you have employees during work hours while they're drawing salary, circulating flyers, handing out buttons, printing materials, et cetera, that could be considered unlawful use of their salary. So that's the main purpose, and it's specifically addressed in the first paragraph, is to comply with that state statute. Then the second paragraph, and second and third, the two middle paragraphs, are a little different. Those are meant to sort of clarify that when employees are speaking on political matters, they can't purport to be representing the views of the school system unless they've got specific authorization from the school system. That's to protect your speech as a board, which is called government speech. You, as a board, you have the right to establish your official position on certain issues, and this language in the policy would prohibit staff from speaking on your behalf, essentially. And then the third point, which is the final paragraph, is to restrict teachers presenting their personal political views to students in the classroom. That's not required by the state statute. It goes a little bit further, but it's also not protected free speech, because we have Fourth Circuit precedent and U.S. Supreme Court precedent says when employees are speaking, when they're paid to speak, when they're engaged in teaching, for teachers' instruction, classroom instruction, they don't have individual First Amendment rights. So this is just to protect students from political proselytizing in the classroom.
And with in the classroom, it also would apply to, say, for example, a coach or a teacher that might be, in the chorus rehearsal or the
Yes.
theater production rehearsal, doing it during that time either, because that may not technically be classroom, but that's acting in their capacity as a school system employee.
That's correct. My classroom reference is shorthand. The actual language of the policy is regards presenting personal political views to students in the classroom or when otherwise engaged in the instruction of students. It's instructional activity in or out of the classroom.
Great. And before I go around with board member comments and questions, we're also trying to address things like using school system emails to, say, send a link to a candidate website, or, passing around a fundraising event, that kind of thing.
Right.
Using school system email
Right.
accounts.
Public resources that are publicly
Yep.
funded. Yeah.
Yep. All right, and I will go around, so everyone will have a chance. Mr. Hershey?
So I had asked a few questions already.
Yep.
Do you want to address those now
Sure.
for everybody?
Sure.
And then I got some others.
Sure. Could you want to remind me of which question? you
I
want
don't
me
have
to
my
do? You had
board email here, so I don't have the questions in front of me, but it had to do with things like Red for Ed,
Okay. Yeah.
and CAE,
Right.
those sorts of things. But I will add that I have a lot of concern with the last paragraph when we're talking about presenting their personal political views to students in a classroom or when otherwise engaged in the instruction of students. There could be a question from a student that they answer that that they may not be thinking of as this is political, but given that all issues seem to be political, I worry about putting our teachers in a really bad position if they're just having a conversation with students. Because I know where we're going with this, but Ms. Edmonds brought up like the coaches and other places of doing this, and we see that the Supreme Court allowed, I think, prayer on football fields and stuff like that, and to see this as a very gray area, but maybe I'm misinterpreting our language.
Well,
That was a lot,
there's
I know.
couple of issues or
Yes.
questions. I'll let staff address the question about red T-shirts. I did forward that question to HR. They could speak to that. I can get more into First Amendment issues if that's helpful. But do you all want to address red for ed?
And there are a couple of different, I guess, facets to your questions. The red for ed in and of itself, so the wearing of a specific color, no matter whatever color, we would not consider that political speech. It could be interpreted, different ways, but just wearing a color. But if it has words on it, or passing out documents, or saying things that would represent certain views or political agendas, that's what would be restricted. But wearing a color that doesn't in and of itself say anything else would not necessarily be political speech.
So Carla, could you expand on that and kind of share the difference between wearing a red, I am a member of NCAE, versus a red shirt that says vote no on resolution 215?
If it actually had the words on it and it wasn't just a red shirt,
Yeah, just a red shirt said I'm a member of NCAE versus a red shirt that says vote no on proposition 123.
right? I think once it has words on it, we would have to look at exactly what it says and how it was used. I think there could be a million different scenarios that would be brought before employee relations possibly. I think we would have to look at each one. Also, the disruption within the school environment matters. That's part of it as well. And then for
To
the-
Dr. Taylor's example, the second one it was endorsing a referendum. So that's clearly covered under your first paragraph. That's during the workday while acting in your official capacity as staff endorsing, and that could be construed as expenditure of a portion of the salary. That's why that example can be addressed separately.
Right, with the words.
So Chair Haggerty and then Mr. Hershey.
Yeah, but I'd like to interject here because this is a conversation that could very quickly go off the rails into a lot of areas that are not within the four corners of this document. This policy specifically is about employee political campaign activities, and that's very intentional. If you look at the changes, particularly the changes in red, and you see when we're talking about political campaign activities, again, the first paragraph, political campaign activities, we're not talking about people expressing opinions that might be political on an issue or political on an ideology or political on a policy or a belief. We're talking specifically about what the courts refer to as electoral advocacy, where you are specifically endorsing the election or defeat of specific candidates for office.
Or
Or a ballot
Initiatives.
issue. So in those cases, if someone expressed an opinion on gun control, that's not specifically covered as a political campaign activity unless we had a state where you had gun control issues on a referendum. Okay? If you had a ballot initiative or constitutional amendment and it was on the ballot, then it would be covered. But just speech, pro-gun control, pro-Second Amendment, however you want to characterize it, would not be covered by this. We know that today, almost any policy issue you talk about could be viewed as political. And there's some issues that we may think are appropriate or inappropriate for staff to talk about, but that's a larger picture than what's in this policy and what's before us. What's before us here is specifically about public employees using, or engaging in campaign activity on on the clock using taxpayer dollars. And that's what we're trying to avoid.
Mr. Hershey?
So two follow-ups. One was kind of about the referendum, and I want to make sure that, because I officiate high school football, and I heard this at stadiums in other counties where they would get on there and say, please support the school bond. I want to make sure that we're not handcuffing ourselves, and we have to be able to say that, and
Actually, that's a very good example of what this would specifically not allow, and that would be...
But explain why.
Because it is support of a referendum. The school bond is a referendum on the ballot, and...
is that against the law?
Yes. Well, expenditure of public funds in support of a school bond is against the law. You can have impartial, objective materials about what the bond does, but you can't advocate for it using public resources. And while we don't have court cases on point, I think it's not a big stretch to say if staff are using some portion of their work time, which is publicly funded salary, to engage in those activities, that would violate the statute.
If someone's announcing at a game and they say, please support the Wake County...
Yeah, we would say that, right, should not
That's
be
against the law,
advocating.
or is that against our policy?
It could be construed as against the law, because the law prohibits the expenditure of public funds in support or opposition to the referendum.
I can make a strong case for public funds, or Wake County Board of Education funds were used to conduct that football game.
Okay, so I just want to do some hypotheticals only because I heard this. And this is not a...
So generally,
This is not a hypothetical that has happened. I have heard this before, being out there.
and so what I can tell you is people will engage in that kind of activity and they just don't get caught. But generally, what a school district can do is can talk about what the funds would be used for in a particular bond or referendum. But we can't go out and say vote for or against. So I think
Right,
that's what
and
Neil is
and
talking
I would
about.
add, if a staff member is not aware of that, they wear, and with good intentions, support the bond to school, I think we could defend that and say the district has not endorsed this is not an official expenditure of public funds, we talked to the employee, it won't happen again. But I do think it's wise to have a policy that generally prohibits that, because if you see coordinated efforts and a lot of advocacy for or against a bond, for or against a particular candidate for office by your staff during work hours, that the more it happens, the easier it is to make the case that Wake County Schools is endorsing the expenditure of public funds in support or opposition to the referendum.
Let's not forget, though, in the example that you raised, the Wake County Partnership, many of our community partners, Wake PTA Council, the Chamber. There are many other organizations, NCAE, that can take a position on the bond. And I think if we move forward with adopting this policy and have those very legitimate concerns, things that would obviously benefit Wake County Public Schools and our students and our staff, such as a school bond, we would need to, engage our partners and let them know that this policy has been adopted, and we're, making an effort to really respectfully limit staff participating in those kinds of campaigns.
That's
But
exactly
it doesn't
what
mean that we don't have a way to advocate for things that would directly benefit the district.
You can also use public resources to provide accurate, objective information about the
Right.
bond, what impact it will have on the tax rate,
Right.
how it will be used to support public schools, as long as it's objective and not advocacy. And you can also encourage people to vote, to exercise their rights. You just can't use public funds to tell them how to vote on their own.
Can you pause 1 moment? Dr. Ng, did you have anything?
It actually my question would just segue into Mr. Ramey's mention about the registering to vote. One of the things I find that, in the early voting period, I see that's a potential issue of people wanting, encouraging people to go out to vote. Whether you're having a sign up there or passing out pamphlets, whatever. you know, when, you know, if it were any mention of any particular party on that poster or in that pamphlet, would that be considered a swaying?
It's interesting. So that would not be covered under the state statute, which prohibits advocacy for or against an election. It may depend on the context. The statute prohibits expenditure of public funds for or against a referendum, election, or particular candidate for elective office. A political party is not clearly one of those things, but if the context made it clear, you know, vote Dem for sheriff or something like that, that's a candidate for office, probably, even if it's not naming that person. But again, as Mr. Hagerty said, the intent here is not to regulate all political speech, because we're quickly going to get into some complex First Amendment areas where there's balancing tests. It's very hard to have a prescriptive policy. The goal here is to implement that state statute for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, I just see that scenario could easily be opened up during the early voting period.
Yeah.
Where people are, you know, very much more cognizant of, you know, needing to go out to vote and then encouraging people to vote. But, you know, can you do it in a neutral way?
Right. It's always fun to say, get out and vote, exercise your right to vote.
Right.
It's important for democracy that everyone vote. Where you cross the line is staff encouraging or discouraging people to vote for particular candidates or for or against particular elections or referendums.
So go back, I want you to finish your thought, Mr. Hershey.
So public school
And I'll come in.
employees cannot advocate to vote for a bond that supports public schools, and that is by law?
Right. Well, it is, although I will, you know, in fairness, the statute prohibits expenditure of public funds, and as I said, there's not a case that I'm aware of right now that says that includes use of staff time for which they're paid. But, you know, I think most school lawyers I've talked to at School of Government and other folks have said that's close. The same for use of district email, for example. There's no additional cost to sending mass emails, but you're using a publicly funded resource to do so.
So to me, one of the things I want you to clarify on that is the difference between serving in an official capacity versus I'm a teacher and I'm off duty and I'm out, you know, campaigning for or against something. I think that is the clear difference in terms of what they can and can't do. If they're at work, if they're in an official capacity, they have to refrain. But if I'm just, you know, at the polls as an individual, there shouldn't be any limit on that. But
Correct.
You kind of
That's exactly correct, and that's the last sentence of the first paragraph, or the sentence before says employees are free to advocate on their own time and with their own resources for or against a referendum, candidate for office, et cetera. That's their protected free speech rights. The limitations only apply during work hours, which will apply to staff that do have set work hours for hourly rate employees. And the final prong is for staff who are acting in an official capacity as a school system employee. Dr. Taylor asked me, like, what's an example of that? I shared, for example, it might include a principal whose salary doesn't have set hours, but is presenting to a PTA, the school PTA, you know, starting at 5 o'clock. So it's not official work hours, but the principal's clearly appearing as a representative for Wake County Public Schools. Not a good time to say, vote for or against this candidate. At a political rally over the weekend, on Facebook, in your personal time, representing your own views, everyone retains their free speech rights.
You want to follow up, or did you want me to?
Yeah, actually, with Lindsay's retirement, I'm technically the vice chair. So I was going to take it over, but our chair has returned, so I will defer that back to her.
So my one follow-up, so are we saying that speech is the same as spending money?
Well,
You keep saying, you know, use of funds, and I'm saying, if someone was at a game and said, please support our bond, please support the bond for public school construction.
Yeah, and if they're at a game, because they just want to watch the football game, and they're there as
So I meant if it was announced.
Yeah.
Take it as
Announced over the PA system.
But I'm saying, like,
Yeah.
so we're saying that kind of speech is the equivalent of spending, using personal,
Well, that's the
using
concern.
public funds.
Right, that's the concern. So again, the statute says, it references expenditure of public funds. There's long-standing guidance from the School of Government that should include use of public resources. The logic would be, and for example, you have an email system that costs quite a bit of money to maintain, but an individual blast email there's no incremental cost for that. But if you had staff sending out blast emails to tens of thousands of people telling them how to vote, you would be using publicly funded resources to endorse. So I think that's I would draw the line to preclude that. And then the question about staff time has not been tested by the courts, but again, I think it's a logical step to make, and on the side of caution, you don't want, especially because you get into line drawing exercises, right? If it's an employee spends, I mean, how much time would be problematic if it's, is it 3 hours of work time that you start prorating the salary and say, well, that could be like $180, or is it, 5 minutes to send some emails? It's just cleaner to say not during work hours, not when you're acting in an official capacity. You are free to advocate for or against any law or candidate on your own time, on your own resources.
Sure, go ahead. Mr.
Okay,
Tyron.
thank you. So I want to come back to a couple of things. One thing, the discussion about voter registration drives, that's something that, we do have 18-year-olds in the schools who are allowed to vote, and so we have traditionally allowed certain kinds of voter registration drives, but this is something that Drew Cook and folks in Dr. Hill's office have worked very closely on. They don't just let anybody in. There's a vetting of the materials, and it's something that if you wanted to talk to them and their office, I think you could see some of those guardrails that are in place. Because again, we don't let candidates or really parties come in, but it's like nonpartisan, nonprofit organizations that come through and just have very generic information about voting. I think that's typically, is that accurate? Okay. But it's an important thing, especially as polarizing as politics can be, that we adhere to some standards, and the district does have those standards in place. So I just wanted to reassure you on that. The other question, I want to make sure, I agree with you in terms of it sounds crazy that school employees should not be able to advocate for bonds because they benefit public education, they benefit the schools, but that is what the law says. If you look at our communications about bonds over the years, you'll notice they're very intentional. Some might wonder, are they kind of bland? They don't seem to be, very exciting or motivating, and that's by design, because we have to walk that fine line between this is the bond, this is what it would do, this is what it would pay for. And like from my point of view, I hope then the benefits of that would be obvious, right? We're going to build this many new elementary schools in this many areas. We're going to renovate these old schools that are in need of important repairs. And we can walk all the way up to that line about saying, so you should vote for it. But that has been the law. And I don't see anything in this policy that changes that restriction. It's just, as we talk about political campaign activities, Neil is correct to warn us and include that includes the referenda campaigns, which includes the bond campaigns. But that shouldn't be a change on anything that we've done to date. I'll say for your specific example, Sam, it's a lot of things. If you look at case by case, you can put these into kind of like a balancing test. And if challenged, you could look at, well, was the PA announcer a school employee who's getting paid, or was he a volunteer? Well, if he's a volunteer, maybe that tilts it this way. But then the PA system during the game is a school-sponsored activity that the school is endorsing, so it pushes a little bit over here. Who paid for the system? If the system, well, not who paid for it, who owns the system, because you could have had private boosters pay for it, but if they've donated it to the school, then it's school resources. And so it can get really complicated. And there's a lot of cases that don't always make the most sense, but I'm trying to err on the side of caution. Counsel is going to give us really, this is what the law says, but as he said, is someone going to go and arrest that guy or charge the school? No.
And I'll add to that districts, and I'm glad you mentioned about what we've done in the past as it relates to referendums, and I would have been shocked had we done something different from that, but districts are really clear on what it is they can and can't do, and so this is obviously a situation that wouldn't pass muster, but I can only imagine that the person didn't know about it. You know, the district is usually clear to say what publications we put out, what we say. Now, that could be completely different from what I would expect, but that's what I would imagine, that they just really didn't know. The districts are usually very clear on what they can and can't do.
And that's all that I had.
Okay, Mr. Hershey?
My only worry is that in the heightened, I understand the email stuff. I'm not advocating for that. It's a teacher using their voice if they're asked or something like that. And this heightened, like, I'm going to catch this teacher saying that, of course, support the bond to someone who asked them or anything like that. And that's my worry, and just making sure we're protecting staff since people are out to try to trap people, and making sure that we're not putting teachers in a bad situation that isn't, that it maybe extends a little bit beyond what state statute says out of our own concern. And so I just want to give voice to that. And, yeah, go ahead.
I mean, what I would, and I think that's a fine point that you make, that, and I don't know what the district has done with teachers in the past, but I think one of the things we can do is to issue some clear guidance on the difference between an official capacity and a non-official capacity. I mean, I think outside of work, most teachers are not going to be in the situation where they're in an official capacity, let's say at a PTA meeting or something like that. But I would say in light of the climate that we're in, that would probably be the most prudent thing to do. I've always issued it to administration and people of that nature, not necessarily anything but teachers, but I think that would probably be wise in this situation, so they would be aware and not get caught up.
One other point is, on Election Day, I don't know if that's technically a teacher work day or not, and are teachers going to be prevented from taking that day off and going to work polls or something like that? That would be a concern of mine for, civic engagement, either direction. I don't know what it's been like or what.
That's a good question, because technically, if it's a teacher work day, they could be considered on the clock, and we know that many of our teachers work the polls for candidates.
They have to take leave.
Yeah, they take leave.
They take leave
Yeah.
on their own time.
So that would not be
Okay.
during work hours or
Yeah.
while acting in their official capacity, so it wouldn't be covered by the policy.
Okay.
They couldn't not take leave and say, well, I'm not going to take leave, so I'm supposed to be at work, but I'm going to go
But
work
I'm
the
gonna
poll
advocate for a
instead half
candidate
the
anyway,
day.
right.
Yeah, they'd have to take leave.
Yep.
And I'll let you guys respond to this as well, that generally you would, if they take leave, they're fine. The only time that might come into issue is that if the principal asks for due and timely notice, if they've got 50 teachers and 49 say they're going to go and work the polls, then they would be in a position where they could deny that leave. But generally, take leave, they're going to be fine.
So in recent years, I know that school has been off, but has it been a teacher work day?
Go back and look.
Because that's a different policy, right?
Yes, and I think what we've done is generally, our election days have been teacher work days under the calendar committee guidance. Primary campaigns have often been teacher work days. It's just been where we have off-year municipal elections or runoff elections are typically when they're not teacher work days.
Mr. Ramey, I had a question about, does this in any way limit, well, I want to go back to the clothing issue, because I'm not interested in limiting what people can wear, whether it's, Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense, or NRA, or, we have a statewide organization called School Meals for All. I think they have some swag, including T-shirts. So does this limit that?
So the language that's currently in the policy, and again, this is NCSBA language, so if you all want to change it, we can work on some provisions, but currently the last sentence is that employees are may not present their personal political views to students. Dr. Mattil has already said he wouldn't interpret a red T-shirt, support public education generally as a political message. It's a little too generic for that, I guess. I do think there is perhaps some interpretive issues in what is a personal political view. And one option would be to track that statutory language we talked earlier. We could make a revision of that, make it much more limited, say, track the exact same statutory language, no advocacy for or against a referendum, election, or candidate for particular office. And then that would clearly not cover any of the examples that you just cited. That would remove it. It would also be less restrictive, for better or for worse, than your current policy. Of course, other issues that came up that were problematic could be addressed on a case-by-case basis of teachers' political regalia, covering them head to toe and every single day, and really forcing political views down elementary students' throats. I imagine that would be a discussion with HR at some point, and that the employee could have appeal rights if they didn't like the outcome. But that would be one option if you're concerned about that language.
And I
Yeah.
do like that because that's
Yeah.
consistent with what we've tried to do throughout the policy, where we're specifically defining it as campaign activities. So from presenting, whatever language, presenting views, advocating for specific candidates or ballot, however you would want to do that, I think, so long as it tracks the rest of that language, that would protect the kind of First Amendment views that you're talking about, while still preventing any direct campaign advocacy during the workday.
And I wanted to circle back to Dr. Ng's point about the registering to vote, or like election day, just general information like when early voting starts and things like that. I really appreciate you bringing that up, because the Republican Party and the Democratic Party both have very benign pamphlets, electronic flyers, whatever it is, that just say early voting starts this date, runs through so-and-so November, election day is here, but at the bottom, it'll say, paid for by the so-and-so party.
Right.
And candidates can do that too. Somebody running for state office could have a flyer similar to that, and even if it doesn't have their picture or their name on it, at the bottom it could say, paid for by, Robert Taylor for House. So I think that does not need to go in policy. I think it's enough just to alert staff, because I don't want to limit staff, if they're pulling it down from the Wake County Board of Elections, to just talk about the dates, the locations, or whatever. I wouldn't want to limit that. Yeah,
Well, I
Dr.
think-
Go ahead. Go
Well, I
ahead.
was just going
Please
to say,
respond.
if I'm reading the room correctly, it seems like several of you would prefer just, as I said at the outset, the main goal is to track the state statute on expenditure of public funds. We could make that same change in that last, it would tighten it up and narrow that. It would mean that some of the cases some of the examples you all have come up with would not be specifically addressed in this policy, which doesn't mean they're specifically allowed or they're specifically prohibited, it just means they're not addressed in the policy. And that, in general, I think that there's some sense to that when you're dealing with potentially protected free speech. It's almost impossible to have a policy that legislates all the things you can say and not say, because when courts decide those cases, they're going to apply a balancing test. That's going to be all the facts and circumstances for employee speech. So, if you all like, I think the easy fix to that would be to change that last sentence to read, however, employees must be mindful of their responsibilities to refrain from endorsing or opposing a referendum, election, or a particular candidate for elective office with students in the classroom or when otherwise engaged in the instruction of students. It's just a more specific application of the general rule.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Ng?
I would just kind of follow up what you said, because when you were talking about those flyers that are printed, campaign finance does require them to put that little blurb even in a minute, small print, that you have to include that. So does that, would that pose a problem, because that sheet is representing a specific party or person? And so that poses a potential problem in my book, but so that's, I'm not quite sure where to land on that. The other issue I was thinking about in terms of like sending out text messages or emails, or nowadays there's a way to delay posting of messages where you can draft it at 7 a.m. and then you post it at 9 a.m. It becomes a little hard to interpret, like, when does it actually work time? You're doing it before work time, you're posting it during work time.
That may be an investigative issue for HR, I suppose, if there were a case that came up and they had to explore it. But again, I think, from my perspective as your attorney, I think the policy would be helpful to defend. You have a large district, you have, 20,000 employees. So there's a fair chance that some employee somewhere is going to tell some student, I think you should vote for so-and-so. And if that happens, I don't think that's a per se violation of the statute that you're going to get, we would have trouble defending in court. We would say there was one teacher, there was a policy prohibited, we talked to the teacher, right? So, but having the policy helps protect you because it says you as a board, are trying to draw a pretty clear, bright line. And if occasionally somebody steps over it, I don't think that's necessarily, fatal.
Any other comments or questions? So, I don't think it's appropriate for this to go on consent. We understand, there's some eyes on this as is appropriate. So what I'd like to do is, with that revision suggested by staff, but also to give our fellow board members an opportunity to, make comments, ask questions, I would like to ask since we put the other item that we're going to have on action on October 7th, I would like a motion to put this on action for October 7th as well.
So moved.
I'll second.
We can discuss before we vote. All right, so
Okay.
we got a motion from Mr. Hershey, second from
Yes.
Mr. Haggerty.
And the motion would include the change that I just read.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So,
Discussion.
Madam Chair, you zigged when I thought you were going to zag.
Okay.
I thought you were going to say, since we have one coming up on the 7th, let's put the other one on the 21st. Was there any particular reason why you wanted them together, or?
Just, in preparation for putting this on this agenda, we've discussed one-on-one, that we were trying to really stay far away from the 2026 elections.
Okay, so doing it earlier.
And so I just see no reason why not. Let's
Okay.
just do it, get it done. So that's sort of my thinking.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or discussion? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great.
All right.
I'm going to adjourn us at 1:58. Thank you, team.
Record.